As much as we love to hate them, villains are a hugely important part of most video games. They're usually the driving force behind the narrative, after all. If it weren't for the actions of our favourite baddies, most video game protagonists would end up just staying at home and putting their feet up. A much happier life for sure, but not a very interesting one for the player.
You know how much I sacrifice?
There are some villains, however, that we do wish would just sit things out occasionally, on account of the fact that they're so blooming scary. Whether it's because they've got a face that only a mother could love, horrific supernatural powers, or a general creepy demeanour, there are multitudes of video game nasties that give us the willies. And not in a good way. For this list then, we're looking back at the entirety of gaming history, that's quite a lot to look at, to find the antagonists and wrong-uns that had us hiding behind our sofas and losing sleep at night. We'll be entering spoiler town on some of these games, of course, so bear that in mind before you proceed. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 most terrifying video game villains. Number 10. The Groom, Outlast Whistleblower. If you're the sort of person who plans on entering into a marriage, then you probably have dreams of a nice wedding with delicious food, good music, and a spouse that doesn't mutilate other people in an attempt to create their ideal woman. Outlast players first meet Eddie Gluskin, aka The Groom, in the Whistleblower DLC, during which he pursues and torments protagonist Waylon Park as he tries to escape from Mount Massive Asylum, with the evidence to condemn his captors. Prior to his stay at the facility, Eddie was, by all accounts, not a very nice man, having been committed after carrying out a number of murders. Like the other patients at the asylum, he is mercilessly experimented on and ultimately becomes the Groom, an unhinged variant obsessed with disfiguring corpses in order to build the perfect bride. Not only is he far quicker and stronger than Waylon, easily restraining him on more than one occasion, but he's also incredibly creepy. He sings weird love songs, addresses Waylon as though he were his romantic partner, and lines him up to be his next attempt at finding a wife. And that's not even mentioning the bit that happens when he's strapped down on the table. Oh no, that's too hot for YouTube, get Number 9. Genova, Final Fantasy VII. When you think of video games with enemies that make you poop yourself, your mind might not immediately go to the Final Fantasy series, because although the franchise has its fair share of wrong-uns, they're not usually the sort you're likely to lose much sleep over. That is, of course, with the exception of Genova. This extraterrestrial nightmare is not only one of the major antagonists of Final Fantasy VII, but it's also thanks to her that a number of other villains have come into being, including everyone's favourite Masamune-wielding toe rag, Sephiroth. Appearance-wise, Genova resembles a human woman with multiple major organs, including a giant heart and something akin to an umbilical cord, all outside of her body. Her skin is a pallid grey colour, she's missing an eye, and by the looks of her hair, she's in serious need of a day in the salon. Looks usually aren't everything, but you'd be right to judge this particular book by its cover, considering that Genova's only purpose in life is seemingly to travel between planets, wiping out every living thing it comes across. I think we better throw in a nice massage with that haircut. Sounds like somebody needs to chill out a little bit. Number 8. Slender Man, Slender the 8 Pages. Even before Slender Man made his leap into the world of video gaming, he was already one very eerie dude. Beginning life as a creepypasta in 2009, he quickly made the rounds on the internet, unsettling anyone who happened to come across his legend. In 2012, developer Mark J. Hadley created Slender the 8 Pages, a survival horror title based on the iconic menace. The game saw players trying to gather notes in the midst of a dark forest, all the while being stalked by the titular Slender Man. Little information is given to the player regarding why they're there and what Slender Man will do should he find them, and yet the game remains spine-chilling. What makes the villain so unsettling is his ability to teleport, meaning he can appear anywhere at any time. It's unclear what he actually does to the protagonist when he catches them, but in our opinion at least, that's worse than knowing the exact details of what torment awaits. Even just looking upon the faceless creature is enough to trigger a game over. Presumably, the mere sight of such a disquieting figure is enough to drive the protagonist fatally insane. So with that in mind, I ask you to repeat after me. It's just a meme. It's just a meme. It's just... Oh, he's right behind...
It's just a meme.
Number 7. The Gatherers. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. You might remember the Gatherers as being the very creatures that propelled so many YouTubers to fame back in the early 2010s, after several of them caused something of a fuss over their appearance in Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Well, we're here to tell you that not a single one of those screams was unwarranted, as these slack-jawed monstrosities are absolute nightmare fuel. Servants of the primary antagonist, Alexander of Brennenburg, the Gatherers are the most common enemies in the 2010 horror title. Since protagonist Daniel is completely unarmed throughout the game, it's impossible to kill the creatures, and the only way to avoid a grisly death is to either run or hide. Fortunately, they do emit a low growl as they approach the player, so as long as you're paying attention, you'll at least know they're coming, even if you can't do much of anything about it. In addition to their decent pace, especially on hard mode, and their crippling attacks, they also decrease Daniel's sanity if he spends too long just looking at them. To be fair, I can see where he's coming from. The more I stare into that giant flappy mouth, the less attached to reality I become as well. Number 6. Pigsy: Manhunt. Considering that Manhunt is a game filled with graphic depictions of extreme violence, it's somewhat surprising that any of its enemies stand out for being scarier than the rest. And yet, even amongst all of the gore and viscera, Pigsy still manages to give us nightmares more than any other. His appearance alone is enough to keep you up at night, and I dare anyone to try and get to sleep with the thoughts of that naked, chainsaw-wielding, pigskin-wearing maniac swimming around in their brain. In addition to his vile visage, Pigsy is also utterly deranged. He behaves in an almost animalistic manner, and after performing in snuff films for years, seems to have lost all grip on reality. He's also barely able to speak, instead just uttering a few words or grunting like a pig. Oh, and there's the small point of the fact that Pigsy is notorious for having murdered a whole bunch of people and for feasting on their remains. What a delightful chap. Though ultimately he is bested by protagonist Cash, he still makes for a terrifying foe. And we can't help but feel like if it hadn't been for that one loose grate, our leading lad would have ended up as just another Pigsy snack. Number 5. The Brain Suckers: Bloodborne. If you went into Bloodborne not realising just how many eldritch nightmares inhabited the game, then you probably had quite a rude awakening the first time you came across a brain sucker, the Cthulhu-faced monstrosities that are out there to steal your mind power. These humanoid horror shows don't just look like something ripped directly from your worst dreams, they're also desperate to see you die horribly, like everything else in a Soulsborne title. Although they may look somewhat frail, with grey skin and slender, elongated limbs, they're surprisingly fast and can viciously attack the player with a variety of different moves. Perhaps the vilest of these is the one that gives the brain sucker its name. The creature is able to grab hold of its victim before driving one of its many tentacles into their skull and sucking on their brain. In doing so, it can drain the player of up to 2 points of insight, as well as causing regular old damage. The hooded variant can also utilize powerful energy attacks that it uses to immobilize the player, making it all the more easy for them to nom on your hippocampus. Trust us when we say this is one enemy you're going to want to give an incredibly wide berth. Number 4. The Witches: Left 4 Dead. You wouldn't think that in a game full of people that are effectively mindless, highly aggressive zombies, there would be any particular enemy that was scarier than the rest. But you'd be wrong, because although the infected have caused Left 4 Dead players to have 1 or 2 toilet accidents, they're not a patch on the Witches. Unlike their regular infected counterparts, witches appear, initially at least, not to be hostile, and can usually be found sitting alone, just wailing. Ugh. It would be easy to write them off as non-threatening, but as anyone who has tangled with one will tell you, this is absolutely not the case. Actually, those people probably won't tell you that, since the witches can often incapacitate or outright kill a player in a single hit, so I'd be surprised if there are any survivors, to be honest. That would be terrifying enough in and of itself, but the witches are also incredibly fast, able to outrun even the speediest of survivors, and if you do find yourself having to face off against one, they're not all that easy to kill either. Pair all of that with their pale, bony physique and claw-like nails that are in serious need of a manicure, and you've got yourself one hecking terrifying villain. Number 3. Dr. Salvador, Resident Evil 4. As Resident Evil titles go, 4 is far from being the scariest, but that doesn't mean the game doesn't have some seriously terrifying enemies to contend with. An honourable mention must go out to the Regenerator and Iron Maiden, no, not that one, whose horrifying faces and needle-covered bodies had us crying ourselves to sleep at night, and don't even get me started on the noises they make. Our writer opted for a different enemy in the top spot though, Dr. Salvador, the sack-headed, chainsaw-wielding villager that pops up at various times during Resident Evil 4. Though there isn't an awful lot to him, being little more than a large man with a penchant for power tools, he still has the ability to have us quaking in our boots every time he makes an appearance. Infected with the Las Plagas parasite, Dr. Salvador has become compelled to violently dispatch any outsiders that dare enter the village. Not only is he fast and soaks up bullets like nobody's business, but that chainsaw can do some incredibly gory damage to our boy Leon Scott Kennedy. Because of Salvador's size, speed, and damage capabilities, players very quickly found out that they were only one misstep or poorly timed reload away from literally losing their heads. Number 2. The Xenomorph, Alien Isolation. Thanks to Alien's colonial marines being a big old pile of plops, the Xenomorph lost some of its scare factor in 2013, and players were left wondering if the iconic alien that was once hugely disturbing could ever truly frighten them again. Fortunately, developer Creative Assembly were hard at work restoring the Xenomorph to its full, horrifying glory, and scare-hungry gamers were treated to the delightfully spooky Alien Isolation in 2014. The reason that the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation is terrifying and the ones in Colonial Marines aren't is that Isolation does a really good job of letting players know that the threat is there and poses a significant danger, but without rubbing it in their faces. After all, it's much more stressful to know the deadly enemy is looming and could pop out at any time, but doesn't, than it is for it to can across a room as it waits for you to sink a bunch of bullets into its stupid, weak face. The fact the Xenomorph was ever stalking also made everything else in the game wee-inducing, so every out-of-place sound and movement had players cowering in fear and wishing the alien would just get on with mutilating them so they could finally go to bed and sob themselves to sleep. Oh god. And number 1, Pyramid Head, Silent Hill 2. If there's one thing more terrifying than a massive lad with a big old knife, it's a massive lad with a big old knife against whom you have no means of defense except to run or hide. Of course, we're talking about everyone's favourite hunky boy, Pyramid Head, who is, in TripleJump's opinion, nothing short of the most petrifying video game villain one could ever come across. Not only is Pyramid Head's appearance terrifying in a slightly arousing kind of way, just look at all those rippling muscles, but he's also obscenely strong, able to wield a blade that, according to one Silent Hill fan who's done the maths, must weigh over 150 kilograms, or 330 pounds if you want to get imperial about this. My dude clearly never skips arm day. Appearing first in 2001's Silent Hill 2, Pyramid Head is the physical manifestation of James Sunderland's guilt over his wife's death. Throughout the game, he stalks the protagonist, often popping up at the most inconvenient of times to try and strangle the poor bloke or stick him with the pointy end of that big old sword. Even when he's not around, though, the player remains in a state of constant fear, never knowing when he's going to next show his face. Figuratively, of course. Show his pyramid, I suppose. Sorry, I've really flubbed the ending there.